Hey, good morning to you, Jeremy. It certainly feels a little bit different this year without the world number one, but I think there's also a relief here, the fact that we can finally concentrate on the tennis. Usually that week leading into the Australian Open is all about the top names that are going to make their run, especially Ash Barty on the back of her Wimbledon performance last year. We had none of that last week, and now finally we can actually get into the tennis with Novak Djokovic, already back in Europe.
Will it feel odd when somebody else wins the singles title, the men's singles, and everyone says, well, you're not really first because the number one wasn't here?
Look, I've heard the argument, and some people have suggested that there's an asterisk next to this year's title. Absolute garbage, to say the least. There are always players injured at any sporting event, including tennis Grand Slams. I mean, even before Novak Djokovic had his visa cancelled, Roger Federer wasn't playing, Serena Williams wasn't playing, Karolina Pliskova wasn't playing. So there were plenty of big names not playing in this year's tournament, and no one batted an eyelid. Now it's almost as if Novak Djokovic is injured and he's simply not here.
I saw someone on Twitter saying you can be the world number one tennis player or the world number one anti-vaxxer, but you can't be both.
Personally, I would choose to be the world's number one tennis player. And I think it was that anti-vaccine sentiment that he has, shared with followers and the press previously that ultimately led to his undoing in this case. That was the concern of the Australian government. They didn't have to prove that he would foster anti-vaccination sentiment. They just had to prove that he may foster anti-vaccination sentiment, that key word being may. And that was enough to put doubt in the mind of the three judges. And we have to remember that it was a unanimous decision from those three judges to see Novak Djokovic deported back to Europe.
And obviously we've got a government here that's in a bit of trouble, and Boris Johnson's government has been operating now what's called a red meat policy, which is doing lots of very obvious, startling things that lots of people like. And is there something red meat about this for the Australian government, that getting rid of Djokovic is a vote winner?
Well, there's a federal election this year. It could be in 2 months, it could be in 4 months. But the fact that recent polls have suggested that 84% of the population didn't believe Novak Djokovic should be here, you would have to say it was the right decision by the Immigration Minister, Alex Hawke. I think there would have been a lot of egg on his face if he didn't have his cars lined up and have the right argument. But when they went into the Federal Court of Australia the other day, thankfully for Alex Hawke, the ruling came out in his favour. But certainly public sentiment didn't want Novak Djokovic here. And I think all those discrepancies last week in the way that he tested positive for COVID in Serbia, then went out with kids, did an interview with media, the questionable travel declaration that apparently his support team signed despite having his signature on it. There were too many discrepancies for the public here, particularly in Melbourne.
Thank you so much. Sports journalist Shane McKinnon, who's in Melbourne at the Australian Open, reporting, commentating, and watching the whole thing become like a normal tennis tournament at last. Kate, do you think they were right to throw him out?
Yeah, absolutely. The rules are the rules. And unfortunately, being great at tennis, it doesn't negate the rules. And I also think that he should appreciate that he's actually still on the receiving end of a huge pile of privilege. You know, most people who try to go to court, it takes years and months to get even a brief hearing and goes backwards and forwards. He's had his case dealt with. It's been dealt with very efficiently. He's been kept in a perfectly pleasant place to stay in the meantime. He didn't stick to the rules. He didn't do what was required. And I think it's so important. Because simply, if you let him in, then what is to stop everybody else thinking that the rules don't have to apply to them? I mean, the same goes for Boris Johnson and his parties. If the rules don't apply to everybody, then everybody will think, well, I must be the exception. I mean, I'm very special and wonderful. So why can't I have the Johnson treatment, the Djokovic treatment? They've got to apply to everybody, and these are the rules.
Christo?
Well, the grounds given by the Australian government was that allowing Novak Djokovic into Australia might fuel anti-vax sentiment. Well, how do they think this has gone? I'm sorry, Australia, I'm pro-vaccine. I've had my 3 shots. I would love Novak Djokovic to be pro-vaccine, but it is his choice. And what is the outcome here? Do Australia want to make an example of him and say what a terribly naughty boy he is, or do they want more people to take the vaccine? Because I would argue that there is no way more people will take the vaccine now in Australia or anywhere by looking at the treatment of Novak Djokovic. The way in which you deal with this is having conversations and having proper debates about the vaccine, and then hopefully people might change their minds. This is not the way to get more people to take the vaccine. Australia have lost their minds.